The name, Dr. Richard Kimble. The destination, Death Row State Prison.
Imagine the world stopping. I'm not talking about a figure of speech. I'm talking about pure cold statistics. August 1967, the height of the American summer. The streets were empty. Restaurants closed early. In London, pubs went silent. Why? Because 72%, listen closely to that number, 72% of all television sets turned on in the United States were tuned to the same channel. More people watched this finale than the moon landing that would happen 2 years later. They weren't there to see a hero win. They were there to see a man stop running. His name was Richard Kimble. The show was The Fugitive. And if you think this is just some old black and white story about a doctor wrongly accused of killing his wife, you have no idea what was happening when the cameras stopped rolling. What you saw on the screen was fiction. What happened behind the scenes was a slow, painful, and documented human collapse. But before I take you inside this cursed set and tell you the real price this fame demanded, I need to know who is with me on this investigation. Pause everything right now. Go down to the comments and tell me, where are you watching this video from? Are you safe on your couch, or are you on the run in your daily grind? Drop your city down below. I want to know how far our signal is reaching. Done? You back? Good. Because now we need to go back to 1963. To understand the weight of The Fugitive, you have to understand that television back then was soft. It was made of happy families, fathers who knew best, and problems that could be solved in 30 minutes. And then came the nightmare. The premise of the show wasn't born in an air-conditioned writer's room. It was born in a pool of real blood in Ohio back in the 50s. No one in production liked to admit this publicly at the time for legal reasons, but everyone knew. The shadow hanging over the script had a name, Dr. Sam Sheppard. In real life, Sheppard's wife was brutally murdered. He swore a bushy-haired stranger broke in. No one believed him. He was convicted. The press destroyed him. The show's creators, Roy Huggins and Quinn Martin, took this human tragedy, this raw injustice, and turned it into primetime entertainment. But there was a problem, a massive problem. TV executives hated the idea. Think about it. A protagonist who is a convicted criminal, a hero who has no home, no money, no allies, and who runs from the police every single week. That's depressing, they said. No one is going to root for a guy who looks guilty. They were wrong. The audience didn't just root for him. The audience became obsessed. But to make this obsession work, they needed a face. It couldn't be an untouchable heartthrob. It had to be someone who looked broken, someone who carried the weight of the world on his shoulders. Enter David Janssen. Remember that name? Because David Janssen didn't just play Richard Kimble. He survived Richard Kimble. Janssen was already known in Hollywood as a hard worker, but The Fugitive demanded something different. It demanded exhaustion. And here starts the secret that very few people tell you about the noir aesthetic of this series. You know that sideways glance Kimble had? That way of walking slightly hunched over, as if he was always expecting a blow to the back. That raspy, tired voice that sounded like it came from someone who hadn't slept in 3 days. That wasn't the Stanislavski method. That wasn't high-level acting. That was David Janssen being ground down by the production machine. The shooting schedule for this show was inhumane. Today, a drama series does 8, maybe 10 episodes a year. The Fugitive, they did 30 episodes per season, 30 hours of film per year. Janssen was in practically every scene. He worked 15, sometimes 16 hours a day, 6 days a week. His nickname on set wasn't Star. It was the gold-plated marathon runner. But it wasn't a compliment. It was a diagnosis. He smoked 4 packs of cigarettes a day. Alcohol was the fuel that kept him standing when the caffeine stopped working. And the directors, they loved it. Pay attention to this. The actor's real exhaustion served the character perfectly. The character's supposed to be tired. The character's supposed to be paranoid. So, when you see David Janssen on screen, with deep bags under his eyes, stumbling over words. You aren't seeing a calculated performance. You are seeing a man at his physical limit. The production saved money on everything, except his suffering. They filmed on real locations, often without proper permits, running before the real police showed up. The line between fiction and reality started to blur. In one episode, Janssen had to run down a real alley, jump a real fence, and land on real concrete. He didn't use stunt doubles for most of these runs. And here is a technical detail that changes how you watch the series. Look at his shoes. Richard Kimble, the character, was always running. He didn't have time to change clothes. He wore cheap dress shoes, secondhand suits he supposedly stole or bought at thrift stores while on the run. David Janssen had to run miles every day, wearing thin-soled, stiff leather dress shoes. The shin splints, the blown-out knees, the swollen ankles, all of that was real. The limp that Kimble develops in some seasons, often it was Janssen trying to hide a real injury because production couldn't stop. The show must go on, they say. But at what cost? And it wasn't just physical, it was mental. The series had a golden rule, imposed by creator Quinn Martin. The fugitive never smiles. Imagine living 4 years of your life where, at work, you are forbidden from showing happiness. Janssen absorbed this. He became a man of few words, cynical, quick on the verbal draw. There is a backstage story that perfectly illustrates the level of tension. Barry Morse, the actor who played Lieutenant Gerard, the man obsessed with capturing Kimble, was the opposite. He was a classic theater actor, British, loved to chat, loved to rehearse. Janssen hated rehearsing. He wanted to arrive, read the lines, shoot, and go home, or to the bar. This friction between the two actors created an electric chemistry. They barely spoke off camera, not because they hated each other, but because they were on opposite mental frequencies. Gerard represented the relentless law. Kimble represented human desperation, and the audience bought this fight as if their own lives were at stake. But the scariest part wasn't what was happening in front of the cameras. It was what the show was doing to the American public's mind. People started seeing Richard Kimble on the street. The police received real calls. He's here. The fugitive doctor is in my town. The fiction was becoming too strong. And while the world got paranoid right along with Kimble, an accident on set almost ended everything ahead of time. A night scene. A simple chase. Janssen was supposed to run, turn a corner, and hide. Simple, right? Wrong. Nobody checked the ground. Nobody saw the hole. What happened next wasn't in the script, but it determined the fate of the series finale, and left a mark on Janssen he would carry to his grave. But this accident, and the final solution the network tried to keep under lock and key, that gets even darker. We are just scratching the surface of the grime that covered this classic. He didn't see the hole. It was dark. The crew was rushing. Janssen was running full tilt, those cheap leather shoes slamming against the pavement. His foot caught the edge. He went down hard. In a modern production, a medic would rush in. The director would yell, "Cut!" Insurance agents would start sweating. But this was 1965 television. Janssen rolled, grimaced, pulled himself up, and kept running. The limp you see in that episode, it wasn't in the script. The pain on his face, that wasn't acting. But the camera kept rolling, and that take made it to air. Why? Because stopping meant losing money. And in the grind of The Fugitive, time was the only currency that mattered. This brings us to a secret about the show's structure that almost no one analyzes today, but it was the key to its hypnotic power. Most shows are about a place. Bonanza was the ranch. Gunsmoke was the town. You knew where you were. The Fugitive was a ghost story. Every week, Richard Kimble arrived in a new town with a new name and a new job. He was a truck driver, a sailmaker, a farmhand. It was an anthology of American life. And because Kimble had to remain invisible, he became the perfect mirror for the people he met. This is where the casting director deserves a medal. Because Janssen was so exhausted, So beaten down by the schedule, he couldn't carry the emotional weight of the dialogue alone every week. He physically couldn't do it, so they flooded the show with guest stars. But not just any guest stars. They brought in heavy hitters and future legends: Robert Duvall, Kurt Russell, Bruce Dern, Telly Savalas. They came in, chewed the scenery, had their dramatic breakdown, and Kimble was just the catalyst. He was the silent observer who fixed their lives and then vanished into the night. It was brilliant economics. It saved Janssen's energy and kept the show fresh. But there was one guest star who wasn't there to save energy. He was there to induce nightmares. We need to talk about the one-armed man. Fred Janssen, the character who started it all. In the original script, he was just a plot device, a shadow. But the producers realized that for the audience to believe in Kimble's innocence, the villain had to be terrifyingly real. They found Bill Reich. Reich wasn't a classically trained Shakespearean actor. He was a stand-in, a tough guy from the old days of Hollywood. And he really had lost his arm, not in a special effects room, but in World War II. He had a rough, unpolished edge that you couldn't fake. When he fought Janssen, it looked messy. It looked dangerous. There's a scene in the series where they fight in a zoo. It's chaotic. It's dirty. And the reason it feels so visceral is that these two men were barely choreographed. They were just grappling. But here is the twist that nearly killed the show. The network, ABC, was terrified of catching him. Think about the business model. If Kimble catches the one-armed man, the show ends. The money stops. The commercials stop. So, the writers had to perform a delicate, agonizing dance for 4 years. Kimble had to get close, almost touch him, and then lose him. It was the ultimate edging of the television audience. And holding this whole chaotic universe together was a voice. You know the voice. Even if you haven't seen the show in years, you can hear it in your head right now. The Fugitive, a Quinn Martin production. That was William Conrad. He wasn't just a narrator, he was the voice of doom. He recorded those intros with a gravity that made you feel like you were watching a Greek tragedy, not a TV show. He reminded you every single week of the stakes, and Niman, an innocent victim of blind justice. It framed the narrative not as a cop show, but as a man against the universe. As the seasons went on, the fatigue on Janssen's face stopped being a performance tool and started becoming a medical concern. By 1967, he was done. He told the producers, "I can't do another year. I'm going to die." He wasn't bluffing. The chain smoking, the drinking, the running. He looked 10 years older than he was. So, they made a decision that was unprecedented in the history of television. They decided to end it, on purpose. Today, series finales are huge events. Breaking Bad, Game of Thrones, The Sopranos. But in 1967, shows didn't end. They just got canceled. They faded away, or the actor was replaced. The Fugitive was the first show to say, "We are going to give you a conclusion." And that decision triggered a level of national hysteria that the government wasn't ready for. When the news leaked that Richard Kimble was finally going to face the one-armed man in a definitive showdown, the world went mad. Betting pools started in offices across America. Was Kimble going to die? Was he going to kill him? Was Gerard going to shoot Kimble by mistake? The producers realized they were sitting on a nuclear bomb of spoilers. If the ending leaked, the suspense was gone. So, they implemented security measures that would make the CIA jealous. Scripts were printed on red paper so they couldn't be photocopied. Photocopiers back then had trouble with red ink. The last few pages of the script, the actual confrontation, were never written down in the main distribution copies. They were hand-delivered to Janssen and the key actors hours before shooting. The set was closed. Guards were posted. Paranoia wasn't just on the screen anymore. It was behind the camera. But even with all that security, they missed one tiny detail. A detail that almost ruined the surprise for millions of people. And the climax itself, the final showdown, it happened in an amusement park. A place of joy turned into a hunting ground. But what happened after the cameras cut for the last time, the immediate aftermath for David Janssen, is the most heartbreaking part of this entire saga. Because while the character finally stopped running, the actor didn't know how to stop. We are approaching the end of the line, the Judgment Day. Tuesday, August 29th, 1967. Part 1. The Judgment. It wasn't just an episode, it was a cultural event. The showdown took place at Pacific Ocean Park in California. And fitting for the noir reality of this production, the park wasn't a shiny, happy place. It was dying. It was closed for renovations that would never really happen, already decaying, rusting in the salt air. Perfect for the end of Richard Kimble. The climax takes place atop a tower, a high, precarious structure. And here is the final terrifying fact about the production. David Janssen was up there in 1967. Health and safety regulations were suggestions. The wind was blowing, the metal was slippery, and the man who was the most valuable asset in television history was climbing around a rusting amusement park tower, fighting a one-armed man with barely any protection. If he falls, the biggest night in TV history becomes a televised obituary. But they got the shot. Kimble corners the one-armed man. The struggle is desperate, and then, the moment the world waited 4 years for, the confession. Lieutenant Gerard, the man who hunted Kimble across every state, the man who ruined his life, is there. He hears it. "I didn't mean to kill her." That sentence broke the spell. The one-armed man falls. Gerard lowers his gun. And for the first time in 120 episodes, Richard Kimble stops looking over his shoulder. He walks away. A free man. The narrator, William Conrad, returns for one last line. Tuesday, August 29th, the day the running stopped. The screen went black. The nation exhaled. But what happened when David Janssen went home that night? You might think he celebrated. Champagne? A party? No. According to those close to him, there was just a massive, hollow silence. When you run a marathon at a sprint pace for 4 years, you don't just stop. You crash. Janssen had spent so much adrenaline, smoked so many cigarettes, and slept so few hours that his body didn't know how to function without the stress. He tried to move on. He did other movies. He starred in a cult classic show called Harry O., where he played a private investigator who was, unsurprisingly, tired, cynical, and physically in pain. He had a bullet lodged in his back in that show. It was like he couldn't play a man who wasn't hurting, but the clock was ticking. The fugitive curse wasn't mystical. It was biological. On February 13th, 1980, just 13 years after the running stopped, David Janssen died of a massive heart attack. He was only 48 years old. Think about that. 48. He gave his life, literally, to entertain us. He traded years of his lifespan for those moments of tension on the screen. When they buried him, the industry mourned a great actor. But looking back now, with the eyes of a detective, we see something else. We see a cautionary tale. The Fugitive is a masterpiece. It proves that you don't need massive budgets or CGI to grip an audience. You just need high stakes and a human face that tells a story of suffering. But it also reminds us that the grind, the hustle, the obsession with work, it always collects a debt. Richard Kimble got his freedom. David Janssen paid the bill. So, the next time you binge watch a series, the next time you see an actor looking particularly haggard and praise their method acting, remember the shoes. Remember the cheap dress shoes running on concrete. Remember the 4 packs of cigarettes. Remember the running that never really stopped. Don't just watch the show. See the cost. Now, I have a question for you to answer before you go. If you were in Kimble's shoes, wrongly accused, hunted, alone, would you have kept running for 4 years? Or would you have turned yourself in? Be honest. Most people break in the first week. Let me know in the comments. And if you want more investigations into the dark side of Hollywood history, more stories about the true cost of fame that the studios don't want you know what to do. Hit that subscribe button, turn on the notifications, because the truth is always on the run. I'll see you in the next shadow.